Hey guys, I decided to break up the reading into chunks. So what you're watching now is a video that was recorded on the 10th of the 5th, 2019. The last video was recorded last year. The reason why I'm doing that is because I think that a lot of these sections are a bit too much to read in one big chunk. So we're going to try our best to break it up into sections of 3 or 4 paragraphs. Also, some of the references I was making in the last video were references that were made to last year's study design, like when I refer to SMART or FIDO, things like that. So I'm just going to read from where we left off and basically explain it from our new context. Okay, so the last thing that I said is that from all other things, this alone consists of personal identity. Since consciousness always accompanies thinking and is that which makes everyone to be what he calls himself and thereby distinguishes himself from all other thinking things, in this alone consists personal identity. What he's basically saying is that because I'm thinking and I'm presenting myself to consciousness, or consciousness is presenting itself to itself, basically that's how we can distinguish ourselves from others, because we experience that consciousness. Bang, you got it. We're able to distinguish ourselves. And then he goes on to say this doesn't just apply in the instant, it applies over time. So let's read that. And as far as this consciousness can be extended backwards to any past action or thought, so far as it reaches the identity of that person. So we have a recipe for psychological continuity. Now it's time to take a note. All right. It is the same self now as it was then, because consciousness is presenting itself to itself in the memories that you have in the past as well as at the moment. And it is the same self which is the present one that now reflects on it that the action was done. All right, moving on. Now, paragraph number 10. Consciousness makes personal identity. Consciousness makes personal identity. But it is further inquired whether it be the same identical substance. So now he's asking, is substance where we look for where personal identity lives? Take a note. This, few would think that they had reason to doubt of, if these perceptions with their consciousness always remained present in the mind, whereby the same thinking thing would be always consciously present, and as it would be thought, evidently the same to itself. So here, especially when we refer to thinking thing, we've got kind of allusions to Descartes. Descartes' thinking thing, remember, existed as a spiritual substance, and he's basically saying a lot of people probably wouldn't doubt that it exists, or the self exists as or in some particular type of substance. But let's see what he has to say about this. But that which seems to make the difficulty is this, that the consciousness being interrupted always by forgetfulness, there being no moment in our lives wherein we have the whole train of all our past actions before our eyes in one view, but even the best memories losing the sight of the part whilst they are in view of another. So focusing on some memories or one section of the memory, not the whole thing. And we sometimes, and at the greatest part of our lives, not reflecting on our past selves, being intent on our present thoughts. So we're thinking about the now rather than everything's happened to us in the past. And in sound sleep, having no thoughts at all, or at least none, with that consciousness which remarks our waking thoughts. I say, in all these cases, our consciousness being interrupted, because we're basically interrupting that psychological continuity somehow, we're losing sight of our past selves. And yep, doubts are raised as to whether or not we are the same thinking thing. So he's saying, and that's really important. This is probably the 5th time I've read this. And the fact that he says doubts which are raised to whether or not we are the same thinking thing is really, really important. Because I wonder if he's distinguishing between thinking thing and substance. Let's have a read though, alright? So he says basically whether it's the same thinking thing, the same substance or not. So even if we're sleeping and the thinking thing resides in our body, our soul or our mind, are we the same thinking thing when we are sleeping? And of course he's saying, well, there are some doubts there. Okay, take a note. Which, however, reasonable or unreasonable, concerns not personal identity at all, but the question being what makes the same person, and not whether it be the same identical substance which always thinks in the same person, which in this case matters not at all. Different substances by the same consciousness, where they do partake in it, being united into one person, as well as different bodies by the same life are united into one animal. So obviously we have different physiological makeups, unite them all together over some physical continuity, and bang, you end up getting different aspects of the one animal tied together by some physical continuity. When he says here, different substances by the same consciousness, you've got the same consciousness aware that it exists in this different substance, be it the mind, soul, body, whatever. Obviously they're united because there's a psychological continuity. Let's keep going. For it being the same consciousness that makes a man be himself to himself. And that's really key. I would probably write this down. I think that's a really good way to understand him. Consciousness presents itself to itself, which allows a person to be aware of who they are. And also, we have memories of being able to present ourselves to ourselves in the past. So there's a psychological continuity within those memories. Okay, take a note. So it says here, personal identity depends on that only. So personality only depends on consciousness's ability to present itself to itself, or that makes man be himself to himself, right? Take a note. Whether it be annexed solely to one individual substance or to be continued in a succession of several substances. So in other words, if I'm presenting myself to myself in, say, one body and then I transfer to another, but I'm still aware that I was presenting myself to myself in the other body, and now that I'm doing the same in this body, it's still the same personal identity, same consciousness. The same goes for the soul or the mind. If I've inhabited a different soul, but I'm presenting myself to myself in one soul, and that same consciousness is now presenting itself to this soul, and it's aware of how it's done that over two different souls, bang, it's still the same personal identity. Take a note. Individual substance or can be continued in succession of several substances. So basically, as long as you have that continuity of that consciousness presenting itself to itself across different substances, you are the same personal identity. For as any intelligent being can repeat the idea of any past action with the same consciousness it had of it at first, and the same consciousness it has of any present action, so far as the same personal self. Same kind of thing, right, guys? For it is by the consciousness it has of itself present thoughts and actions that is to itself now. So basically, you're aware of your thoughts and actions. You're aware of yourself through those thoughts and actions. You can perceive your perception. You can perceive your thinking, that kind of stuff. But you're aware that it is you now, and you're aware that it is you in your memories. Okay? And so will be the same self as far as the consciousness can extend to past actions. So again, he's alluding to psychological continuity over time. So I'm aware that I did that in the past, aware that I did that now, and I'm aware that I'll do it in times to come. And would be distance of time, and would be by distance of time or change of substance, no more two persons than a man. Be two men by wearing other clothes today than he did yesterday. So what he's saying is, if that consciousness which presents itself to itself inhabits a different substance, be it soul, mind, or body, it's almost like it's wearing different clothes, but it's the same consciousness. And as long as it's got that memory thread of it being the same consciousness and it presenting itself to itself throughout the different substances, it's just like it's wearing new clothes, with long or short sleep between, so sometimes it can be interrupted. The same consciousness uniting those distant actions into the same person, whatever substances contributed to their production. So, I can produce memories because I interact with the body or soul or mind, but as long as the consciousness experience is presenting itself to itself across the different substances, it could be the different substance that produces the different memories, but hey, it still is the same thing psychologically in psychological continuity. So what you've probably got right now is one of the best ways to understand psychological continuity is to say that it is consciousness presenting itself to itself through its thoughts over time, which could occur across different substances. Take a note. All right, number 11. Personal identity in change of substances. That this is so we have some kind of evidence in our very bodies, all those particles whilst vitally united to the same thinking conscious self, so that we feel when they are touched and are affected by and conscious of good or harm that happens to them, are a part of ourselves, i.e. our thinking conscious self. So in other words, we're intimately linked with our bodies. In fact, part of our thinking conscious self is in our body, and that's really important to remember. But of course, it's not totally it. You can transfer consciousness across different bodies, all right? So thus the limbs of his body are to everyone a part of himself. He sympathizes and is concerned for them. Cut off a hand and thereby separated from that consciousness he had of his heat, cold, and other affections, and is then no longer a part of that which is himself, any more than the remotest part of matter. Thus, we see the substance whereof a personal self consisted at one time may be varied at another. So in other words, I could be one body, cut off my hand, I'm a different body, without the change of personal identity. Of course not, because even though you're in a theoretically different body, once you cut your hand off, your consciousness is still presenting itself to itself in that line of psychological continuity, okay? With the change of personal identity, there being no question about the same person, though the limbs by which we are now a part of it are cut off. All right, so what we're basically saying is we can prove by changing the body that even though substance may change, as long as consciousness is presenting itself to consciousness and it has memories of doing that in the past and will form them in the future, personhood or being a person is completely different from the particular substance that it inhabits. Take a note. I'm going to write a quick question for you to directly go to. Look it up at the same section. It'll be under the same title as I'm going to title this section of the reading. All right? Cheers.